Namaste.
Namaste.
Ramana Maharshi's pure teaching is contained in a number of booklets written by him or about his teaching. One in particular is this little booklet carried here. It's called Truth Revealed. Very small, you can carry it in a shirt pocket. It's very pure. It is Bhagavan himself sharing that which is the totality of being in just 40 verses. There's something traditional about 40 verses in the Hindu system. I frankly do not know how to explain that, but there is. And Bhagavan was asked to reveal the truth, reality, in Sanskrit called Sat, in 40 verses. Now these 40 verses are very terse. They're right to the point. There are no extra words that are given that are not necessary. Bhagavan's disciple, Muruganar, who lived with Bhagavan for a number of years, was the one who beseeched Bhagavan to give this teaching in 40 verses. And Bhagavan agreed to do so. Muruganar had gone around among some of the devotees who had been with Bhagavan and collected a number of verses from them that Bhagavan had written. Bhagavan most of the time was living in silence in those days. This is back in the mid to early 1900s. And he was living in the silence in those days. And he would write whatever someone would ask him a question, and he would write it down because he was not maintaining verbal communication with people. And so Muruganar went around and collected a number of these verses from his earlier disciples, but then he asked Bhagavan if he would intentionally write 40 verses and on reality, and intentionally just for this particular purpose. Well, Bhagavan agreed to do this. And then after he had written the 40 verses, Muruganar collected some of these others that Bhagavan he had already gotten, and began to put those together in what is called a supplement. And he asked Bhagavan whether he would assist him in doing the supplement up to the 40 verses. And Bhagavan agreed also to do that, but on that occasion, he didn't just give original verses. He chose or selected various verses from time to time that actually explained the subject in question. He did write some more verses, but he also selected a number of verses that he found to be very beneficial to the subject, and those were collected by Muruganar and were called the supplement to 40 verses. And these two are also in here. So there are the 40 verses, the originals, as well as the supplement to the 40 verses contained in this little booklet. And then somewhere along the line, Muruganar or someone else, a disciple of Bhagavan, reduced these into the essence of those 40 verses and did them in a little bit more simple and direct way to express. I'm going to share some of these with you because they're very beneficial. This is the synopsis, the ones that are the revised version. And the first two verses were chosen as invocations to the 40. The first two verses in invocation. Reality is at once being and consciousness. To know that is to be that in the heart, transcending thought. Reality is at once being and consciousness. To know that is to be that in the heart, transcending thought. See for yourself how to the point, how terse, how directly immediate that those two sentences are. And then as a footnote to that, Bhagavan says, I am that I am, in all capital letters, taken from or quoted from Exodus in the Bible, which implies the metaphysical dictum that the proof of existence is existence itself. Again, he minces no words. The proof of existence is existence itself. And from the Bible, I am that I am. And then the second invocational verse, absolute surrender to the Supreme Lord, whereby the I and mine are destroyed, is the one means to realize immortality. Now let's consider that just a moment. Absolute surrender to the Supreme Lord, whereby the sense of I. He doesn't say the sense of I, I'm saying that. He just says the I and mine, M-I-N-E. That means ownership. It's the body and ownership of the body are destroyed is the one means to realize immortality. Now that's just about as direct as it can be said. One who wishes to know the truth about the infinite and eternal nature of pure being, all that is necessary is absolutely surrendering to God, the Supreme Being, whereby one's own sense of I, the body, and mine, M-I-N-E, ownership of the body are destroyed, is the one means to realize immortality. Now the verses themselves, verse number 1. Now you can see if that's an introduction to the verses, you can get an idea of how direct and how terse to the point these verses actually are. The Supreme Being, the one ultimate cause of the universe, manifest himself as many, which do not exist apart from him, apart from the Supreme Being. Verse 2. Any dispute regarding the nature of manifestation can arise only so long as there is the ego. To destroy the ego and to be as the self is the supreme method of attainment. Now let's look at that one. Any disagreement, any dispute, any argument over the nature of manifestation, the nature of this world, of persons, places, and things, this world of time and space. So any dispute, any disagreement can arise only so long as there is the individual sense of I. In other words, as long as there is the ego, which is how Bhagavan puts it, as long as there is the ego. To destroy the ego, that's the personal sense of I, the one who has a position or a point of view, to destroy that and be, simply be as the self, is the supreme method of attaining the absolute reality. Verse 3. Since the one aim is to realize the self by destroying the ego, to engage oneself in verbal wrangling about the nature of the world is but vain. In other words, why get involved in an argument over the nature of the world, whether it is conscious or not, whether it is good or evil or not? Why get involved in it To engage oneself in such verbal wrangling about the nature of the world is simply vanity, since the one aim is to realize the self by destroying the ego. Can we get this? Number 4. To him who is one with the formless self, everything is formless. So, if one is identified with the body and the mind, then everything is going to appear to have form. But if one has surrendered identification with the body and the mind, or has surrendered identification with form, then everything is going to be formless. Number 5. Existence of the world is merely relative to the sentient body. In other words, if we're not identified with form or with the body, then we're not going to be identified with the world in which it is necessary for there to be a body. It is by our identification with the sentient body that we are going to see the world as itself having existence. Number 6. The world is really synonymous with the mind. In other words, the world and the mind are one and the same thing. The mind is that which sees the world, and the world does not exist without the mind to see it. I might add, if there's anyone has any questions or anything you would like to ask in relation to these, please just ask it. Just let us know.
Ramana?
Yes.
I received an email today, and the person said that they were seeing the events, some events in their life, and there was some sadness that arose. They could see the sadness, but it was just sad. It was just sadness. What occurred to me to respond would be, and it seems to be
what occurred? I'm sorry?
To respond, and it feels right in line with this, is the experience of sadness is neither sad nor glad. It's just sadness. It's just sadness. It's when there's the form that makes it one way or another. Otherwise, it's just simply an experience of what we have named sadness.
Yes, and our identifying with it as being sad, as opposed to just seeing it as what's occurring, what's rising, what's coming up is just a simple expression, an expression of thought. We're the ones that calls it sad. If we were not calling it sad and seeing it as sad, how would it be sad? And it's always that way. We're the ones that sees a situation as being upsetting or not upsetting. It's our own conditioned patterns, our own mind, that qualifies and characterizes something to be this way or that way. If it was not for the mind and its conditioning that calls it this or that, we would otherwise have no way of knowing it to be this or that, for it is just as it is without any qualifications in the moment. Is that what you're getting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I also ask, is that the same with something that's joyful? Should you also keep a distance and not acknowledge?
I'm sorry?
Is that the same way with something that is joyful? Should you also keep a distance?
Yes. You see, to say something is joyful has to do also with the conditioning for saying it and seeing it as joyful. The events themselves are all neutral. There is neither this nor that in any event. It's the mind and how the mind has been conditioned by us in our own past that calls something either joyous or sad. As either excuse me. Is calling something as either good or bad, right or wrong. You see, all of the pairs of dualities are actually conditioned patterns of the mind. But the pure awareness of the self that we in truth are has no dualities of good or bad, right or wrong, hot or cold, up or down, in or out. All of the opposites are only products of the conditioning of our mind that sees them in opposition based upon the way we are relating with them in any given moment. The same event in one moment that we call okay may in another moment be not okay. And it is we that call it either okay or not okay. The event itself doesn't know anything about being okay or not okay. It's just an event. But we're the ones that name an event, an experience, a situation as being the way that we are seeing it to be in relationship to the moment in which we are identified with it and the way that we are identified with it. Okay? You see it? Okay. Okay, since it is knowledge that illumines the world is ulterior to knowledge. That knowledge is alone real, whichever remains changeless. This is the very thing here we're talking about. Since it is knowledge that illumines the world, then knowledge is ulterior to the world. That knowledge is alone real, whichever remains changeless. So when we can stay in the pure awareness in which the world itself is manifesting and not see the world as okay or not okay, good or bad, good or evil, but just see it as pure world, then that knowledge of seeing the world in a changeless mode is pure knowledge. Because in truth, there is no right or wrong or good or bad as far as the world is concerned. The world is a product of consciousness, but not the product of the mind itself. Okay, number 8.
Ramana. So if, take it kind of as just a general, we all agree that killing, we've made an agreement that killing is really not acceptable, or not correct, or not right. We can even say not right. So it's an agreement we've made, but that doesn't make it right or wrong. It just makes it the agreement that we've made.
Yes. It's under the circumstances, it's the mind that sees the circumstances, and in the circumstances of the moment is what determines something to be apparently okay or not okay, apparently right or wrong. Let's go back and read it again. Since it is knowledge that illumines the world, consciousness, knowledge, our knowledge of the world, our consciousness of the world is what sees the world. So in our seeing of the world, then knowledge then is prior to, ulterior to, or before the world. Our knowledge is even before the world is. Is that clear enough? We can't see the world unless we're first there as consciousness, as knowingness, the ability to know and see the world. If we're not there as the ability to know the world, there is no world. Do we get that? So, that knowledge alone is real, whichever remains without change. Changeless, without change. Neither okay nor not okay. It just is. Totally changeless. Now, what is it that changes the world from okay to not okay? Not our knowledge of the world, not our knowledge of the world in its purity, just pure consciousness of the world. That's not what makes the world okay or not okay. What is it that makes the world not okay or not okay?
Conditioned patterns.
The mind. The mind. The conditioned patterns of our mind that says it's okay or not okay. Do we get this? Okay. Worship under name and form is only a means to realize one's absolute identity with the nameless and formless. So, worship under name and form is only a means to realize our absolute identity with the nameless and formless. So God, the nameless and formless essence, is the very self that we are, but we cannot recognize that unless we have instilled within us, moving within us, the tendency to worship God under any name or any form. Our worshiping of God in a name and a form is the process, is the means for us to realize our own absolute identity with the sourcing essence, the Creator that is nameless and formless. Can we get this? Okay. Number 9. He alone that has realized the self in the heart has known the truth. Truth with a capital T. He alone that has realized the self in the heart has known the truth, having transcended the dualities, etc., the good and bad, all of the opposites. He is never perplexed. Now let's just consider that. It cuts right through it, doesn't it, if we see it? He alone that has realized the self in the heart has known the truth, having transcended the dualities, all of the opposites. He is never perplexed. When you are abiding in the self, in the heart, in the pure awareness of simple being, pure being, prior to the dualities, prior to all of the opposites of okay and not okay, good and bad, right and wrong, etc., then you are never perplexed. There's never any confusion, any contradiction. You're ever free and clear.
That's like when having to make a decision about something. When it's coming from the mind, it's, well, should I or shouldn't I? And when it's coming from the purity, it just happens. There's no question about it, there's no doubt about it, and it's easy, it flows. But when it comes from the mind, then there's that perplex.
Yes, then the mind has uncertainty as to whether I should do this or that. Should I or shouldn't I? But if you're living in the pure awareness of being, there's no doubt about it. It will give you the insight into what is the appropriate action in the moment to take without any doubt. Okay? Are we getting these?
Yeah, they're very helpful because I had lots of questions and my mind was trying to understand last night, and it's exactly what you just said, Ramana. I've been perplexed. So thank you.
She said it's perfect because her mind is bringing up lots of questions, and what you're reading is assisting in these questions leaving. Close enough?
Yes. Okay. Number 10. That alone is true knowledge, which reveals the self through self-inquiry. To whom pertains, or I should say just through inquiry, to whom pertains the interdependent pairs of knowledge and ignorance. So again, that alone is true knowledge, which reveals the self through inquiry to whom pertains the interdependent pairs of knowledge and ignorance. Now, interdependent, they're dependent upon each other. You can't have knowledge without ignorance, and you can't have ignorance without knowledge. So to whom are these interdependent pairs of knowledge and ignorance? Well, it's the pure self, the pure being. So it's Vivian's question. That alone is true knowledge which reveals the pure self through inquiry, to whom pertains the interdependent pair of knowledge and ignorance. Number 11. Self-knowledge in which both knowledge and phenomena fall off is alone true knowledge, because the self is the source of all. To know all else except the knower is but ignorance. Let's do that one again. Self-knowledge in which both knowledge and phenomena, that's what's happening in the world, what's manifesting and what is seen, fall off. That is alone true knowledge, because the self is the source of all. To know all else except the knower is but ignorance. Bhagavan Ramana used to ask this question. Imagine that you were capable of knowing all there was to know about everything, but you didn't know who knew. Now just imagine this for a minute. Imagine that you were capable of knowing all there is to know about everything, but you did not know who knew. Then what would you know? In other words, your knowledge would be ignorance. If you didn't know the knowing self, then your knowledge would be simply ignorance. And again, that's what he's saying here. He's just approaching it from a different perspective. Number 12. The self being knowledge absolute, or absolute knowledge, it is neither knowing nor not knowing. In other words, it just is. It can never be unconsciousness, nescience, or lack of consciousness. Let's do it again. The self, being knowledge absolute, pure knowing, is neither knowing nor not knowing. It can never be without consciousness. It is consciousness, but it is never this nor that. It is neither knowing nor not knowing. It is that which is prior to both and is inclusive of both. Okay? Number 13. The self being one and universal, knowledge of diversity is but ignorance, which also is not apart from the self. Again, the self being one and universal, then knowledge of diversity, of differences, is but ignorance. The self is one and universal. So, knowledge of diversity is but ignorance, which also, this ignorance, is not apart from the one universal self. Okay. Now you may have to contemplating on these and be still with them and meditate on them for the full insight and the full meaning of them to reveal itself to you. Number 14. On inquiry as to the nature of the I, it is found that knowledge of diversity is but ignorance, which depends on the I. You couldn't have the diversity without the I that sees the diversity. The self alone then shines as the one reality. Again, on inquiry as to the nature of the I, it is found that knowledge of diversity is but ignorance, which depends on the I. The self alone then shines as the one reality. Number 15. Since past and future have never been without the present, to know the eternal now is to know the truth. Now let's just be with this one. Very significant. Of course, all of them are significant. Since past and future have never been without the present, to know the eternal now is to know the truth. Now let's look at it this way. In the past, whenever in the past what was occurring, it was now. It was in the present. Everything that occurs as it is occurring is always occurring only in the present moment. We're all here right now. in this present moment, and I am sharing with you in this present moment this number 15. It was a present moment when I was sharing with you number 1. At that time, in that moment, as I was sharing it with you, it was the present moment as I was sharing it with you. When I get around to sharing the next one, which is in the future, that too will be the present moment. While it is being shared, it will be the present moment. Everything that occurs while it is occurring is the present moment. Everything in the past and everything in the future, as it is occurring in the moment of its occurring, is the present moment, or is the now. It's now when it's occurring. So, to know the now, which is eternal, is to know the truth. Everything that occurs only occurs now. Nothing ever occurs then. To say something occurs then, we can only say it now about something that is yet to occur or that has already occurred, but we can only say it now because only this now moment is real. No other moment is real but this present moment. So, to know the eternal now, this present moment, is to know the truth. All right, were you with me? Okay. Number 16. Now we're in the future. It's now. The changeless, infinite self transcends time and space, which are relative to the body and the mind. The changeless, infinite self transcends time and space, which are relative to the body and the mind. The body and the mind are appearing in time and space that is not itself real. It is only appearing in the changeless, infinite self. The self is what is real and what not, and it's what does not change. Time and space appear to change and appear to be real, but in fact are unreal and only appearing in the changeless self, and the time and space are only pertaining to or relative to the body and the mind, which are in a state of constant change. All right, number 17. To the ignorant The I is the self limited to the body. To the wise, the I is the self that is infinite. Again, to the infinite, the I is the self limited to the body. To the wise, the I is the self infinite. And number 18, to the ignorant, the world is the sole self-existent reality. To the wise, that formless infinite being which underlies the world is the one reality. Again, to the ignorant, the world is the sole self-existent reality. To the wise, that formless infinite being which underlies the world is the one reality. 19. The sage who has realized the self transcends both free will and destiny, with which only the ignorant are concerned. The sage who has realized the self transcends both free will and destiny, with which only the ignorant are concerned. And number 20, God is none other than the self. To see the self, having destroyed the ego, is to see God. All else is but a vision of the mind. And I think that's enough for today. That's a halfway point. I think that can fill us up pretty good right there, Ken. It's been delightful to share this time with you all, and particularly to share these 20 very terse, very pure statements of the supreme truth, that which is, as shared by Sri Bhagavan Ramana, the great sage. Namaste.
Namaste.